She heard the muffled sound of babies crying. Then, a voice, weak, desperate. "Please, help. Before we dive into this story, I need to know something. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where you had to make a choice you weren't ready for? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe some lives are worth saving, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The city street was dim, the soft glow of streetlights barely cutting through the night. The air carried the smell of wet pavement, mixed with the faint hum of distant traffic. The moon hung low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. Sophia had just stepped out of the corner convenience store, a bag of chips in hand. She was hungry, too hungry to care about much else. The light from the store's neon sign flickered behind her, but it didn't do much to brighten the grimy street she was walking down. She was used to this, the long walks after a late shift at the diner, the feeling of loneliness that seemed to settle deeper with every step. She was used to being invisible. People barely noticed her, and if they did, they quickly looked away. The world had a way of pushing people like her aside, those struggling, those working 2 jobs just to get by. Her shoes, worn at the heels, tapped against the cracked sidewalk as she walked, lost in thought, until she heard it. Faint cry. A baby. No, 2 babies. She froze, the sound slicing through the quiet. She looked around, her heart starting to race. The alley ahead was dark, but the noise, it was unmistakable. Sophia stepped forward, her curiosity pulling her toward the sound. She turned the corner and nearly stumbled as she saw a man, slumped against a brick wall, blood staining his clothes, one hand clutching a bundle of blankets. The other hand, bloody and trembling, clutched something she couldn't see at first. His eyes were glazed, his breath shallow. The babies, twin infants, were nestled against his chest, crying but safe for the moment. The man's eyes met hers, a silent plea for help. I don't know what happened." His voice was barely above a whisper, ragged. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something about the way he looked at her, like he was trusting her with more than just his life. She blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A man, holding his babies, covered in blood, and in desperate need of help. The confusion hit her, but so did something else. Compassion. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she knelt beside him. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and his grip tightened on the twins. She looked around. No one else was in sight. She was on her own. The man's eyes were starting to lose focus. He was slipping, but the babies, his babies, were still crying, their little faces contorted in fear. She didn't hesitate. She had to act. She slipped off her jacket, wrapping it around the man's shoulders as best as she could. He winced, but the babies quieted for a moment as she adjusted them in his arms. "Please, don't leave them," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her mind raced, calculating the steps she had to take. She knew she wasn't in a position to help someone like this. Not by herself. But she couldn't leave him. Not with the twins like this. She had to get him somewhere safe. Somewhere she could help him. The man's eyes fluttered open again, his voice strained. "You don't know who I am." Sophia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the babies. She didn't care who he was. Not right now. The only thing that mattered was getting him help. "I don't care," she said softly, trying to steady herself. Just hold on, okay?" Her pulse quickened as she looked around for a way to move him. The world seemed to stand still. All that mattered were these children, these innocent little lives who were depending on her, just like she depended on others in her own life. They needed her. "Don't leave them alone," the man repeated, and his words hit her like a punch to the gut. She nodded, though she wasn't sure if he could even see her anymore. The weight of the moment was pressing in, the uncertainty of what would come next making her chest tighten. She wasn't sure if she could save him, but she couldn't let him die here in the alley, alone. "I won't leave you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. In the distance, the sound of a siren began to wail, but it felt too far away. She knew she had to get the man to safety, fast. She stood up, looking around once more. No one else was in sight. She took a breath and did the only thing she could think of. She gently lifted one of the twins from the man's chest and cradled the baby in her arms. The baby's small body was warm, trembling, but alive. She couldn't help but feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her. With determination, she reached out for the man, lifting him as best as she could. His body was heavy, and his blood stained her hands. But she pushed through the fear, the uncertainty. She had to get them out of here. She had to get them help. "Just hold on, please," she muttered under her breath as she carefully pulled him up, one step at a time. Sophia moved quickly, trying to keep her balance as she half-carried the man toward her small car. The babies, bundled in the makeshift swaddles she'd created out of her jacket, were quiet now, as though sensing the danger. Her heart raced in her chest, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. She needed to get them somewhere safe, somewhere he could get help. But there was no hospital close by, no ambulance on the way. She was on her own. The man, still clinging to consciousness, gave her a faint, almost imperceptible nod when she spoke to him. "You're going to be okay. I'll get you help," she assured him, even though her own voice trembled with uncertainty. She reached the car and pulled open the door with one hand, struggling to keep him steady. She glanced back at the alley, the stillness of the street pressing down on her. She didn't know if anyone had seen them, if anyone had called for help. All she knew was that the clock was ticking. The man's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His breath came in ragged gasps, and he seemed to be fighting to stay conscious. Every time he spoke, it was quieter, weaker. "Please." "The twins," he said, his voice barely audible. "They need somewhere safe." Sophia nodded again, swallowing hard. She was trying to keep it together, but everything felt so overwhelming. She'd never been in a situation like this. She'd always kept to herself, always made sure she didn't get involved with anything that could put her in danger. But tonight was different. Tonight, this man and his babies had found her, and somehow she couldn't walk away. She adjusted the babies in her arms, making sure they were okay. They were so small, so fragile, and it broke her heart to see them in this situation. She couldn't help but wonder who would leave a father like this, a man who had 2 babies depending on him, in the middle of the street, bleeding out. "Who did this to you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she helped him into the passenger seat of the car. The man grimaced, his eyes flickering with pain. "It doesn't matter. Just get them out of here." Sophia bit her lip, her mind racing. She didn't know who he was or why he was in this situation. He didn't seem like someone who would be in the kind of trouble that would leave him in an alley, barely alive, clutching 2 babies. There was something about him, though. Something about the way he carried himself even in this weakened state. He wasn't just some random stranger. There was a quiet strength to him that felt different. Something more. She pushed the thought aside. It didn't matter. All that mattered was getting them to safety. She slammed the car door shut and ran around to the driver's side. Her hands were shaking as she started the engine, glancing at the rearview mirror. No one was following. For now, they were safe. "Where should I take you?" she asked, trying to break the silence. The quiet between them felt heavy, pressing down on her shoulders like the weight of the world. The man's eyes flickered to the road, and he seemed to struggle to find his words. His lips parted, but the words never came. It was like he was battling something inside, something that was stopping him from speaking, from sharing what he knew. "Anywhere," he finally said. His voice was hoarse. "Just anywhere. Just get them to safety." Sophia's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she pulled away from the curb, her thoughts running in circles. She had no plan, no idea what to do next. She was just reacting, moving in whatever direction her instincts told her. Her car hit the main road, the city lights blurring by, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something much bigger than she could handle. The man was still breathing unevenly beside her, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of blood in the car. The babies, now resting in her arms, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, their tiny hands gripping her shirt. Sophia glanced at the man again, her heart aching at how much pain he was in. There were still so many questions that lingered in her mind. Who was he? What had happened to him? And why hadn't he told her the truth? Her eyes caught a glimpse of the man's hand. His fingers were stained with blood, his wrist adorned with an expensive-looking watch, the kind that only someone with a lot of money could afford. For a moment, she wondered if this was some kind of twisted joke, if he was some rich man who thought he could pay his way out of trouble. But then she remembered his words, the way he'd said, "Just get them out of here," with so much urgency. There was something genuine about the fear in his voice. She couldn't figure it out. It didn't make sense. But she couldn't focus on that now. She had to get them to safety. The silence in the car was thick and uncomfortable. Neither of them spoke for what felt like an eternity, the only sound being the hum of the engine and the occasional soft whimper from the twins. Then, just as she was about to ask him again where to go, his voice broke the silence. "Take me to the old warehouse on 5th, he said. His voice was low, like he was trying to hide the words, but there was something in them that made Sophia pause. The old warehouse. It was a place people only used for one thing: secrecy. It was a place where deals were made in the dark, where nobody asked questions. Sophia swallowed hard. She had heard about places like this, places where money, power, and danger collided. But she had no choice. She couldn't go back, and she couldn't leave the twins behind. She nodded, her mind still reeling from the decision she was about to make. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something she couldn't walk away from, something that would change both of their lives forever. But neither of them knew this was only the beginning. Sophia's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she drove through the dark streets. The old warehouse was just a few blocks away now, and her mind was racing. The man beside her was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. The babies, still nestled in her arms, were quiet for the moment, their tiny bodies barely making a sound. She had driven in silence for the past 10 minutes, her thoughts clouded with questions, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She didn't know where to take them after this. She didn't know what was going to happen once they arrived. She didn't even know who this man really was. "Why won't you tell me what's going on?" she whispered under her breath, more to herself than to him. She wasn't expecting an answer. Not after everything. He hadn't said much since they left the alley. When they had pulled up to the warehouse, she had hesitated. Felt wrong, but she didn't know where else to go. Her heart pounded, and her mind drifted to the twins. They had no one but her now, and she had no one but them. She had spent years taking care of her own little boy, always worrying about the future and what could go wrong. But nothing had ever been this far out of her control. As the warehouse loomed closer, a strange feeling settled in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper. Maybe it was regret. But that didn't matter now. She had no choice but to follow through. She glanced at the man, his face pale, his eyes half-lidded. He was still fighting to hold on, but it was clear he wasn't going to make it much longer if she didn't get him help. She had to keep pushing forward. When the car finally stopped in front of the warehouse, she killed the engine. The parking lot was empty, silent except for the distant hum of traffic. The only thing that felt real in that moment was the weight of the babies in her arms and the life she had just stepped into. She looked at him, her voice a whisper. "We're here." He didn't respond at first. He just stared ahead, his eyes unfocused. Then, with a ragged breath, he turned toward her, and his lips barely moved. Don't get involved," he murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion. "This isn't your fight." Sophia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. He had been so adamant about getting the babies to safety, and now he was telling her to leave them? To leave him? Her stomach twisted in disbelief. She shook her head, the words burning on the tip of her tongue. "I'm not leaving you. Not now." He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering with something, regret, maybe, or fear. He didn't seem to want to explain. "You don't know who I am," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophia stared at him, confusion mingling with frustration. She had heard the desperation in his voice earlier, had felt the urgency in his eyes, but now he was trying to push her away. What kind of man was he? "I don't care who you are," she said, her voice trembling. "I care about them, and right now, you're the only one who can help them." She motioned to the twins, who were still quietly resting in her arms. For a moment, the man's gaze softened, but only for a split second. Then he closed his eyes again, his chest heaving with each breath. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice faint. Sophia's frustration boiled over. "And you think I have a choice?" There was a long pause. His face looked so drained, so defeated. And for the first time since the moment she'd found him in that alley, she realized that he wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting to protect something. Something bigger than just himself. A sound from behind broke the silence. Footsteps approaching fast. Sophia tensed, her heart racing. She wasn't sure who it was or if they were coming to help or hurt them. All she knew was that she couldn't trust anyone but herself right now. She looked at the man again, who was slowly starting to lose consciousness. There wasn't time to think, to second-guess herself. The sound of a car pulling up in the distance jolted her back to reality. It was too late to turn back now. The twins stirred again, their little whimpers filling the air. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the man one more time. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please." But there was no response. She opened the door of the car and stepped out, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She glanced back at the man, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no going back from this. But neither of them knew. This was just the beginning of the chaos that would pull them both into a world they never saw coming. Sophia stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin. She took a quick glance around, her eyes scanning the shadows of the old warehouse. It wasn't just any warehouse. It was abandoned, tucked away in the industrial part of town, far from the nearest lights or people. The silence hung heavy, making her feel like she was walking into the unknown. Her hands still trembled from the weight of the decision she'd made, but she couldn't go back now. The twins needed her. And the man, she couldn't leave him to die. She opened the back door of the car carefully, the babies still in her arms. She held them close, feeling the warmth of their tiny bodies against her chest. They were so small, so fragile, and every second she spent hesitating could be the difference between life and death. She turned back to the passenger side, where the man sat slumped in the seat. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. His hand was still gripping the door handle, but it seemed as though he was struggling to keep himself awake. "Stay with me," Sophia said, walking around to his side of the car. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked. "You can't pass out now." The man barely nodded. His eyes flickered open for a moment before he closed them again, clearly too weak to hold himself up. Sophia cursed under her breath. She couldn't do this alone. She didn't know how long it would take for help to arrive, if help was even coming. The whole situation felt like a ticking time bomb, and she was the one holding the fuse. She slid into the passenger seat beside him, trying to steady him in her arms. "I need you to focus," she said softly. "Just a little longer." But the man didn't respond. Sophia glanced over at the front of the warehouse. She could see a dim light now coming from inside, faint but enough to make her realize someone was waiting. Someone was expecting them. Her heart pounded harder in her chest as she stood up, supporting the man as he struggled to rise. With each step, the cold ground beneath her feet seemed to get heavier, as if the weight of what was happening was pressing down on her. She couldn't stop now. There was no going back. They made their way toward the warehouse door, each step slower than the last. The man kept muttering, his words slurring together. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, barely a whisper. "None of this is for you." Sophia shook her head, her eyes narrowed with determination. "I don't care who you are. I'm not leaving you to die." But the man's words echoed in her mind. "None of this is for you." He was right, though. She didn't belong here. This wasn't her world. The streets she'd walked were small and familiar. The world of power, danger, and wealth felt foreign to her. But this man and his babies, she couldn't turn her back on them now. The door creaked open as they reached it, and a figure stepped forward from the shadows. The faint light illuminated his face, but it was enough for Sophia to see the coldness in his eyes. She stopped, taking a breath. She had no idea who he was, but she could feel the danger radiating off him. This was no ordinary place, and the people here weren't ordinary either. "Is he alive?" the man asked, his voice low but sharp. Sophia nodded, adjusting her grip on the man she was holding. For now. The stranger stepped closer, eyeing the man with a calculating look. "We're not equipped to handle this," he muttered, glancing at Sophia. "You shouldn't have brought him here." Sophia stood her ground, staring back at him with a steady gaze. "I'm not leaving until you help him." The stranger didn't speak for a moment, his cold expression never changing. He seemed to weigh his options, sizing her up before his lips curled into something like a sneer. "You think you can just walk in here, uninvited, and tell us what to do?" he asked, his voice taking on a more dangerous edge. Sophia's heart raced, but she wasn't backing down now. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for him." She motioned to the man in her arms. "I don't care about anything else." The stranger paused, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of weakness. After a long, tense silence, he finally let out a sharp exhale. "Fine," he said, stepping aside to let them pass. "You're lucky you brought him in here alive." Sophia didn't waste any time. She moved quickly, almost dragging the man inside. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, feeling the weight of every step she took. The inside of the warehouse was dark, lit only by a few hanging bulbs that barely illuminated the vast space. The air smelled of dust and old wood, the sound of their footsteps echoing as they moved further in. Sophia wasn't sure what she expected, but this wasn't it. There were no warm welcomes, no comforting words, just cold eyes watching her every move, like she was an intruder in their world. But she didn't care. She just wanted the man to survive. And she wasn't leaving until she knew the twins were safe, too. Whatever he was hiding, whatever world he was part of, it was too late for him to keep it from her now. The room felt colder the moment they stepped inside. The stark, dimly lit interior of the warehouse seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows hiding whatever secrets it held. Sophia moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder at the man in her arms. He was barely conscious, but his hand had tightened around hers, as if still fighting to hold on. They walked past the strange figure who had let them in, a man with a face as cold as the concrete floor beneath them. His eyes followed them as they moved deeper into the space. No words were exchanged, only the soft shuffle of feet and the occasional rattle of metal in the distance. The silence was suffocating, and Sophia's heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. The man she was carrying groaned softly, his body sagging against hers. She tightened her grip, trying to keep him upright, but every step felt heavier than the last. The weight of the twins in her arms, the man's life slipping away, and the cold stares from everyone around her. All of it was pushing her to the brink. They stopped in front of a rusted door, the metal frame bent and worn with age. A figure stood inside, watching them with a quiet intensity. This wasn't what Sophia had expected. She had hoped for help. She had hoped for a chance to breathe, even for just a moment. But everything about this place felt wrong. "Lay him down there," the figure inside the room said, gesturing to a cot in the corner. Sophia didn't hesitate. She carefully placed the man down, her hands shaking as she adjusted the babies in her arms. As she looked down at him, the weight of the situation finally hit her. His face was pale, his breath shallow. She had no idea who he really was, what he was involved in, or why she was still here. But there was something about him. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way he had tried to protect the twins, or the quiet desperation in his voice when he spoke earlier. He wasn't just some stranger. He was someone who needed her, and she wasn't going to let him down. As she stood over him, the figure who had let them in approached. He reached into a nearby cabinet, pulling out medical supplies. His movements were quick, precise, like someone who had done this countless times before. "What's wrong with him?" Sophia asked, her voice more forceful than she intended. The man didn't look up, but he answered. "Bullet wounds. The one in his chest is the worst." Sophia's stomach twisted. She hadn't realized just how bad it was. The blood on his shirt had dried, dark and thick. There wasn't much she could do, but she had to trust that these people knew what they were doing. Her mind raced, still trying to piece together what had happened. Why had the man been shot? What was he running from? Who was he really? And why had he been so determined to keep her out of it? As the figure worked, Sophia stepped back, sitting down in a nearby chair. Her eyes flickered to the twins, who were still sound asleep in her arms. They were so innocent, so small. They had no idea what kind of danger they had been born into, no idea what they were about to face. The man worked in silence, his hands steady as he cleaned and dressed the wound. Sophia watched him, her thoughts heavy. She wanted answers, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for them. "What do you know about him?" she asked, her voice soft. The man didn't answer right away. He paused, his eyes briefly meeting hers. There was something guarded about him, something hidden. He didn't trust her. That much was clear. "He's not who you think he is," the man finally said, his voice low. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The figure didn't respond immediately. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before speaking again. "Not everyone here is what they appear to be," he said, his tone more serious than ever. "You're in deeper than you realize." Sophia stared at him, her thoughts swirling. She didn't have time for riddles. She didn't have time to figure out who these people were or what their motivations were. All she knew was that she couldn't let this man die. Not when he had done everything he could to protect the twins. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. "I need to know what's going on. Who is he? And why is he so desperate to protect these babies?" The figure glanced at her but didn't answer right away. Instead, he finished cleaning the wound and started to apply a bandage. The silence stretched on, the only sound the rustling of cloth and the soft, labored breaths of the man on the cot. Finally, the man looked up at her, his expression hard. "You really want to know?" Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving him. She needed answers. The figure took a deep breath. "He's not just some random guy. He's a billionaire. A real one, not some internet celebrity. And these twins? They're his." Sophia's heart stuttered in her chest. "What do you mean, his?" The man's lips twisted in something like a half-smile, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get it, do you? He's not just some ordinary guy who stumbled into your life. He's part of a world that's far beyond anything you've ever known. And these twins..." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "They're part of something much bigger. Something he's been trying to keep hidden." Sophia's mind was spinning. A billionaire? She had no idea what to make of that. Everything was moving too fast. Too many pieces were still missing. But one thing was clear now. The man she had been trying to help wasn't just some stranger on the street. He was tied up in something much larger than she could imagine. And that thought, that realization, sent a chill through her that she couldn't shake. But the more she learned, the more dangerous it became. She was no longer just helping him. She was becoming part of the mess he'd been running from. Sophia sat in the corner of the dim room, watching as the man on the cot slowly regained consciousness. The room had grown quiet, save for the distant hum of an old fan and the soft rustling of papers in the back. The twins were sleeping soundly beside her, their tiny breaths steady and untroubled, unaware of the chaos around them. She felt numb. Her mind kept replaying everything she'd learned so far, but the more she thought about it, the less it made sense. A billionaire? His twins? What had she walked into? What had she agreed to? She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes never leaving the man on the cot. He looked different now, weaker. The blood had been cleaned up, the bullet wounds treated, but the darkness in his eyes hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had deepened. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and Sophia's head snapped up. The figure from before, The man who had let them in stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh light from outside. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with that unreadable look on his face. "I didn't ask for your help," Sophia finally said, her voice sharp. The words tasted bitter, like something that had been festering in her throat for too long. The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You didn't have to," he replied. His voice was colder than usual. "You don't belong here. None of this is yours to fix." Sophia stood, her frustration boiling over. "I'm trying to help him. What's so wrong with that?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the cot, eyeing the injured man with a look that was almost pitying. "You think you're saving him?" he asked, shaking his head. "You're just a pawn in this game, just like everyone else. You don't get to make the rules." The words hit her harder than they should have. She knew she wasn't in control here, but hearing it from him, so bluntly, made it feel even more real. She wasn't just helping him. She was getting tangled up in something far beyond her reach. She glanced down at the man on the cot, his breathing steady now, but there was still a deep, haunting emptiness in his eyes. "What's going on with him?" she asked, her voice quieter this time. The figure didn't look at her as he spoke. "He's caught in something dangerous. You think this is just a simple case of a guy getting shot? This goes deeper than that." Sophia felt a knot tighten in her chest. The answers she'd gotten so far weren't enough. She needed more. She had to understand why all of this was happening. "I don't care about the danger," she said, her voice firm. "I care about him, about the twins. I need to know what's really going on." The man's gaze flicked to her, something almost amused flickering in his eyes. "You really think you can handle this?" She stood up straighter, her heart pounding. "I don't know what I can handle, but I'm not leaving. Not now." The man's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You're in over your head." Sophia didn't flinch. "I've been in worse situations before." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the tension between them thick and palpable. The man watched her for a moment longer, then sighed, stepping back toward the door. "Fine," he muttered, "but you're going to learn the hard way." Sophia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't care what it took. She couldn't leave now. The man on the cot, the one who had tried to protect those babies, who had fought to keep them safe, he needed her. And the twins needed her too. She walked back over to the cot, her hand brushing the twins' hair as she crouched down next to the man. His eyes flickered open, just for a moment, meeting hers with a look that made her heart ache. "Stay with me," she whispered. "You're not alone." He blinked slowly, barely registering her words. But it was enough to tell her that he was still with her, still fighting. The door behind her creaked open again, and she turned to see the man from before standing in the doorway. This time he wasn't alone. 2 more men followed, their presence imposing, and one of them was holding a small, black bag. It wasn't just medical supplies. Sophia's pulse quickened. "What is this?" The man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "This is the reality you don't want to face. You're involved now, whether you like it or not." He opened the bag, revealing stacks of cash, thick bundles of bills, some of them still wrapped in rubber bands. "This is just the beginning. If you want to stay, you'll need to understand the cost." Sophia felt her stomach drop. Her mind raced, struggling to process what she was seeing. Money, power. This wasn't just a case of an injured man needing help. This was something bigger, something dangerous. She stood frozen for a moment, her eyes flicking between the man, the money, and the twins, still sleeping peacefully in her arms. Everything she thought she knew had just been turned upside down. And then it hit her. She wasn't just caught up in a life-or-death situation for him. She was now entangled in a world of power, secrets, and consequences. A world that didn't care about what she wanted. But it was too late. She was already in. And there was no turning back. You can run or you can fight. But in this world, there's no middle ground. Sophia's heart was pounding in her chest as the men stood around her, their presence heavy and undeniable. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, and she was suffocating under it. She could feel the coldness of the room, but it wasn't the temperature. It was the silence, the tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The man on the cot stirred, his eyes flickering open again, this time with more clarity. The pain was obvious in his face, but so was something else. A desperation to say something, to explain. But Sophia wasn't sure if she wanted to hear it anymore. She wasn't sure she was ready for whatever truth was coming. The two men in the doorway watched her, their expressions unreadable. The one who had been giving her the cryptic warnings stood to her right, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. The other man, a bit older, his face scarred with age and hard living, looked at her like she was a problem to solve. "You don't get it, do you?" the older man said, his voice gravelly, like he had smoked too many cigarettes in his life. "This isn't just about helping him. This is about making sure this mess doesn't ruin you too." Sophia's pulse quickened. The words hit her harder than they should have. She'd been so focused on saving the man on the cot, on helping the twins, that she hadn't thought about herself. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling more than she intended. She couldn't keep the panic out of her words, no matter how hard she tried. The older man's eyes softened for a second before hardening again. "Doesn't matter. You're already in it now, and that means you either stay and face what's coming, or you walk away. But walking away might cost you more than you think." She swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what they were talking about, but it didn't matter. She had already made a decision. She couldn't walk away, not now, not after everything. She glanced back at the man on the cot, his breathing shallow again, but there was something in his eyes that told her he was still fighting, still trying to hold on, and she wasn't going to let him die, not without understanding everything. She stepped forward, facing the man who had been watching her closely. "What is this really about?" she demanded, her voice more forceful now, desperate for answers. "Why does he need all this? What are you involved in?" The man didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered toward the man on the cot, who was struggling to stay awake. Then, slowly, he turned his attention back to her. "He's a part of something bigger," he said, his voice low. "Bigger than you, bigger than us. The money, the danger, it's all connected. He's in a war you don't even understand." Sophia's heart sank. "A war? What does that even mean?" The man's expression darkened, and for a moment, he looked almost regretful. "The kind of war you don't come out of without getting scarred. And the kind of war that takes everything from you. Family, friends, your life if you're not careful." Her hands clenched into fists, a mix of frustration and fear bubbling inside her. She had no idea what kind of world she had stepped into, but it didn't matter now. She couldn't leave him, not after everything. "I don't care about his war," she said, her voice shaking with determination. "I care about him, and the twins. I'll face whatever comes, but I'm not walking away. Not now." The older man nodded slowly, as if assessing her. He didn't speak for a long time, and in the silence, Sophia felt every second of the weight pressing down on her. She had no idea what this world was, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going anywhere. Finally, the man spoke again. "You're a brave one, I'll give you that. But I'm not sure you understand what you're up against. You're not just saving him. You're saving everyone who's ever crossed paths with him. And that includes you now." Sophia stared at him, her chest tight. "I don't care. I don't care about what's coming. I'm staying." The man studied her for a long moment, before he nodded. "Fine, but you're going to have to be ready. Because what's coming, it won't be easy." Sophia didn't back down. She didn't move. "I'm ready." As the man turned to leave, Sophia's mind spun with what she had just learned. She had no idea what this war was, but she knew one thing. She was no longer just a bystander. She was a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She stepped over to the cot and knelt beside the man. His eyes fluttered open again, and he gave her a faint smile, as if he was relieved to see her still there. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. His hand reached out, weak but determined, and she took it in hers. "I'm not leaving you," she said quietly, her voice filled with a promise. But in that moment, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The calm before the storm. But the storm was already here, and there was no turning back now. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds, casting a soft glow on the room. The hum of the old fan was the only sound breaking the stillness. Sophia sat in the same spot she had all night, her back stiff but her eyes never leaving the man on the cot. His breathing was steady now. He had fought through the worst of it. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still so much they had to face, so much left unsaid. She could feel the weight of what had happened settling in her chest. The truth of the world she had stepped into, the power, the danger, it was all too much sometimes. But no matter how heavy it felt, she wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. The twins stirred beside her, their little bodies still warm from sleep. She smiled at the sight of them. They were innocent, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded. And that was the one thing that kept her going, those twins and him. A soft groan from the cot made her turn her head. The man's eyes were open again, his gaze cloudy at first, but gradually focusing on her. His hand weakly reached out to hers, and she instinctively took it. She didn't care if she was in over her head. She cared about him. She cared about the life they could still build, even with the wreckage around them. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere," Sophia replied softly, her thumb brushing over his hand. "You're safe now." He managed a weak smile, but it was enough. It told her everything she needed to know. He was still with her, and she had made the right choice. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The man who had been watching her since the beginning stepped into the room, his presence imposing but oddly comforting. He didn't speak right away, just watched the scene before him. The twins, still nestled in her arms. The man on the cot, fighting to stay awake. And Sophia sitting between them, determined. "You're still in this?" he asked finally, his voice rough but somehow softened. "I thought you'd walk away by now." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The man gave a small, resigned shake of his head, but there was no anger in his expression. "I thought you might be different, but maybe I was wrong." "Maybe," she said, her voice strong, "but I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not for him, not for the twins, not for anyone." The man stood there for a long moment, his gaze flicking between her and the man on the cot. Finally, he sighed and took a step back. "I'm not here to make things harder," he said quietly. "But the truth is, you're in deep now. There's no way out without consequences." Sophia didn't flinch. "I'm ready for whatever comes." He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "All right, just know, you won't be alone." And with that, he turned and left the room. Sophia didn't know what the future held. The danger, the threats, the shadows, none of it was gone. But for the first time since everything had started, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that hospital room weeks ago, unsure of what she was stepping into. She had found something deeper, something worth fighting for. She looked down at the man on the cot, his eyes still locked on hers, his grip on her hand tightening, even if only slightly. "I'm here," she whispered again, this time more for herself than for him. "And I'm not going anywhere." The door opened again, but this time, it wasn't the same tense silence. The twins, fully awake now, began to giggle and squirm in her arms. The sound was so pure, so innocent, and it filled the room with warmth. Sophia laughed softly, the first real laugh she had had in what felt like forever. For a moment, the world outside seemed distant. There was no threat, no danger, just the soft, loving chaos of a new beginning. She stood up, carefully lifting the twins, and walked toward the small kitchen area. The man on the cot watched her, his gaze softening as he slowly tried to sit up, his body still weak from the ordeal. "You're doing good," he murmured, his voice thick with gratitude and something deeper. She wasn't sure if it was affection or something more, something that was still tangled up in the confusion of everything they'd been through. But it didn't matter. Not yet. Sophia turned back to him, a quiet smile playing at her lips. "We're doing this together." His eyes softened, the smallest of smiles tugging at his lips. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. She wasn't backing down now. In that moment, with the twins safe in her arms, and the man by her side, everything felt right. The storm had passed, and for the first time, the light seemed to shine through the cracks. There was still so much ahead, but they would face it together. They would rebuild. And for once, she believed that love in all its forms, was worth fighting for. The twins' laughter echoed in the room, and as Sophia held them close, she realized that sometimes love wasn't just about finding it. It was about holding on to it, even when the world tried to tear it apart. Do you believe some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.